the newsletter that I have this coming weekend is talking about your sales pipeline lying to you. And so this is where I said this may break a few hearts up here, at the beginning here, but I'll mend all the hearts as we go here. So I want to talk a little bit about how I think sales pipelines lie to people. And I'm going to run through this list here. If you want to know more, you can check in on the newsletter or watch it on YouTube later this next week. But there's a handful of them. And one of the biggest ones, in fact, before I get into that, why do you even know that your sales pipe, or why do you need to know that your sales pipeline is lying to you? Because people get a false sense of security when they look at their pipeline and they see $35 million in it or $75 million in it. Or if you're a smaller company and you see $3 million in it, you get a very false sense of security that you've done what you need to do. And it's just going to work out. And then you're not closing and you're like, why? I've got this pipeline. Why isn't it working? It's because you're not working the pipeline correctly. And that's what these little bullet points are. So one of the first ways pipelines tend to lie to people is they have stale and dead leads. I've gone and looked at people's pipelines before, and I'm like, this says you haven't updated this in 180 days, in 375 days. You haven't updated. Why is it still in your pipeline? And I usually get blank stares on that one. So stale and dead leads, unqualified prospects, things that people have just put in their pipeline because they're like, I saw an opportunity and I dropped it in, and it's nowhere near qualified, but hey, it's a $7 million opportunity. It's an $8 million opportunity, and they just drop it in. So unqualified prospects, overestimating your probability of winning, where they're like, oh, there's this project and it's $110 million. And our biggest contract ever has been $50,000, but we've got it in the pipeline. So overestimating the probability of winning, chasing unfunded requirements is one where I see people. It's very easy to start talking to contracting officers or a PM, or maybe you just got out of the Air Force and you have some folks that are really good friends and you're talking to them and they start talking about these requirements as requirements, but they're not really requirements. They're just kind of like pipe dreams. And it's easy to go back to that person and talk and talk and talk. But if it's an unfunded requirement and it's not on a forecast, it's not going in anything, like you can chase those and now you have an inflated pipeline, which kind of goes with sometimes your pipeline is full of hopes and dreams instead of like really good contracts. And so like we've got to be very careful about that so that our pipeline's not full of those kind of things. There's another one here is sometimes there's too many prime bids in your pipeline and not enough sub bids, where you're trying to make the transition and your percentage is out of whack, where you're like 90% of the things in your pipeline would be you priming, and you just don't have a chance of winning as a prime. And you really need to be a sub on that, or you need to be searching for other sub things. So that's one that will inflate the pipeline. Not having a clear path forward, where there's no procurement timeline, there's no contract vehicle picked. They really haven't figured it out. They've been talking to you a little bit about it. Kind of goes with one of the earlier ones I said there, but there's just no clear path forward, and it's still in your pipeline. Like it's something you can push out and follow up with, but it maybe shouldn't be in your pipeline. Another one is you have no engagement with the customer. You never spoken with the customer. You don't know who they are. You don't recognize any of the names. There's just a line in your CRM. There's zero engagement with the customer. You haven't done a sources sought. You haven't sent them an email ever. No engagement with the customer is also a big red flag to me on pipelines. And then I think another one is ignoring the incumbent, where you're looking at something and you're like, wow, this company's had this contract several years. And yes, incumbents aren't a slam dunk like they used to be. However, if you are not stacking the deck in your favor to go after somebody who's really held a contract for a long time, it's really hard to knock an incumbent off their seat if you've not done your homework. So those are a handful of things that can cause your pipeline to kind of lie to you. I'm going to flip the script. So I maybe broke some hearts there. I'm going to flip the script and talk the other side of this for a minute, and then we'll take some questions. So on the other side of this, you need to be purging stale and unqualified leads. You need to set a time limit on things. And if you're not updating them and checking them regularly, you need to purge stuff out of your pipeline. Because if you, again, have an inflated pipeline and it's got millions and millions of dollars in it, you may get up every day and check it and feel like you've done all the work you need to do when in reality you haven't. But if you purge it, now your pipeline went from 35 million to 2 million. You're like, oh, I've got to get on the ball and start making some stuff happen. And I know that sounds like an example where you're like, that doesn't happen. I did a pipeline review with a client a few months ago. He had $142 million in his pipeline. In 30 minutes of going through his pipeline, it was down to $12 million from 142 to 12. And he said, there's probably a few of these I should take out as well. I'm like, yeah, you probably should. And like, that's why the last 6 months you have been so off course, because you have this inflated pipeline. You thought all this stuff was going to come in and it was all just pipe dreams. Like it just wasn't going to happen. So purging the pipeline from time to time is really good. Implementing a qualification framework of some sort where okay, this item it's been budgeted. They have a need. There's a clear timetable, things like that. So you have enough things in your pipeline that have a clear path forward versus things that are just, well, maybe it'll close someday. Like you need enough things in your pipeline that aren't dreams and hopes. And so having a clear qualification framework where there's a path forward, that's going to change how you look at your pipeline. So it's not just, oh, it's my pipeline and everything's in it, right? I like to look at the pipeline from a perspective of there's your whole pipeline, but I need to zoom in what's going to close in the next 90 days. Like what has an 80+% chance to close in the next 90 days? That's what I want to hear about. I want to see those opportunities. Those are really, really important to me. The next one is, I kind of hinted at this earlier, balancing on the prime and subcontracting strategies so that you have the right amount. I don't care whether you're 2 years in the business or 20 years in the business. I've had clients that have been in this for a really long time who kind of forgot that they were a prime. And all of a sudden they woke up one day and they're like, Mike, we've lost a lot of these prime contracts. We haven't had a prime contract in 5 years. Like, wait, you have no past performance as a prime anymore, because they were leaning on their sub work. So like, okay, we probably shouldn't be bidding 100% prime work right now because you don't have past performance. So you need to balance how much of your pipeline is prime and sub. Josh and I harp about this all the time, and it can transition as you grow. But if you are not consistently winning prime contracts and you lose that past performance, you're going to have to go back to the drawing board and start getting some more sub work so that you can inch back into the prime work and do that. You should be engaging customers early and often. If you have done a propensity report or who buys what you sell report, you should have contacts that you can reach out and start talking to, and not about anything specific, but just you buy what I sell. I'm either reintroducing myself or introducing myself, and you're talking to them and you're starting to build a relationship. So reaching out early and often to engage them is a really big deal. I think it's important to use competitive intelligence to track the incumbents, look at their pricing, look at what agencies are buying, how often, all that kind of stuff. You can get some of that through your SAM.gov reports, the deep dive reports I was just talking about. Some of it you may have to look in GSA reports and different things like that. But using some competitive intelligence so that you can go back to your qualification framework and say, can we even be competitive on this? When we get to the bid, no bid, is this even remotely something we can bid on? That kind of thing. You need to be reviewing your pipeline at set intervals, whether it's monthly or every other month. I wouldn't even go quarterly, monthly or every month at a minimum, to make sure what's in your pipeline should be in your pipeline. You've got the right mix of opportunities. You need to have internally actionable steps for each opportunity. If you're just looking at each opportunity every week and going, well, it hasn't been updated, end of review, high five, everyone. Like, that's not good enough. You've actually got to be able to look at your opportunities and say, what's the next step here? The next step is I need to reach out to a contracting officer. I need to reach out to a teaming partner. I need to do some pre-work on the RFP or whatever it may be. You need actionable steps to follow in your pipeline, or else, again, you're looking at it and by the way, this is through no fault of your own, likely. Just a lot of people don't have these thoughts, and that's why I'm sharing them with you today. So, but if you don't have actionable steps, what are you doing with that opportunity? When are you going to touch it next? And if you let it get stale, it's like a relationship where, like, imagine, not calling your mom for 2 months and then calling her all of a sudden. She's going to be like, where you been? What's going on? Update me on your life, right? Um, who are you? That can happen. So, like, you need to be touching base and have really good actionable steps. There's always talking about, we talk about really leveraging BD and capture best practices, which is kind of what we've been talking about this whole time. Just executing a structured plan, I think, is really important. But I'll leave you with this one before we open up to take questions. I think you've got to be brutally honest about the things that are in your pipeline and why they're in your pipeline. That's probably the biggest takeaway. Like, you've got to be brutally honest. Why is this in my pipeline? If you've gone 60, 90, 180 days, you haven't touched it, why is it in my pipeline? You've got to be brutally honest. Should I take it out? Should I reach out to the contracting officer? Probably. Should I reach out to my cons? Probably. When you're networking, talking to people, say, hey, does anybody know what's going on with this opportunity? Probably. But you've got to be brutally honest about that stuff. So those are the handful of things that really contribute to a pipeline lying to you. Those are a handful of things on the other end of how you can get a clearer, cleaner, more accurate pipeline. And I think once you do that, it helps you understand the heavy lift that you need to do, or, hey, we're right on the right track once you kind of clean the pipeline and do that.